Somebody giggled. That was all that happened.
I wouldn't do that one.
Was it you?
Maybe.
Oh. And the counselor that said it was sitting right in front of me. That's what made me think of it. All right, so now we'll begin our proper meeting here.
No.
Welcome to the meeting. We do have a quorum. So if we could just start out introducing ourselves, starting with Mary at the end.
Oh, Mary Sinclair.
Bob Semple.
Patty Cameron.
Terry Wallace.
Nancy Fiorentino.
Asna?
Paula.
Tom Manzik.
Jeff Gilbreth.
Jane Cardinal.
Robin Ellis.
Matthew Principato.
Melissa McGinnis.
Carmela Bennett.
Ken Leaderts.
Lee Marie Garza.
And Joey behind the camera. And I don't know the person here. Okay. He's from the Hamilton Inspector. Is he gonna put the paintings in?
No.
Patty, go ahead.
Is it right of me to ask our guests, like, who they are, like,
What they're doing.
besides their name?
Part of that is in the agenda,
Yeah?
and, do you wanna do it now?
I'll start off. I'm Ken Leaderts. I'm the Director of Licensing and Animal Services. Been with the city for about 18 months now. Before that, I had a career in policing. So I'm recently here with the city and now in charge of licensing.
We're very happy to see you. We hope you like us at the end of the meeting.
And I'm Carmela Bennett. I'm a supervisor of licensing, and I supervise the bylaw officer who enforces the licensing bylaw.
Awesome.
You used to do something else.
No, I've always.
Next.
I'm Melissa McGinnis. I'm in the facilities department. I'm an accommodations and compliance coordinator. I came to the last meeting and then I wanted to keep standing in on the meetings for interest.
Welcome again.
So I'm Matthew Principato. I'm with the Housing Services Division for the City of Hamilton. I'm here today to do a presentation on our point-in-time count that's coming up at the end of February.
Robin Ellis, Acting Manager, Capital and Compliance and Facilities. I work with Melissa, and we're here to speak on item 6.3, accessibility on the Hamilton Beachfront Trail.
I didn't hear the last part. Might you use a microphone, if you don't mind?
So Melissa and I are here to speak on item 6.3, accessibility on the beachfront trail.
Awesome. All right, so we'll begin. Are there changes to the agenda? Minutes of November 10th will be distributed soon, but that the minutes for December 8th have been distributed today. Have people had a chance to look at that? All right. Any amendments or corrections necessary? Could I have a motion to accept the minutes of December 8th? Terry, seconded by Bob. All in favor?
Aye.
Carrie, thank you. Do we have any consent items?
Madam Chair, we do not have any consent items or presentation items, even though we have several presentations tonight. They are listed under discussion items for the purposes of enabling the committee to ask questions and have that back and forth conversation.
Okay, thank you. So, do we have an idea how long each presentation will take? Okay. Point in time, do you know how long that may take? I guess it depends on our questions, right?
My piece of the presentation should hopefully take less than 5 minutes, but I invite everyone to ask any questions they may have, and that might take an additional 10 to 20 minutes.
Okay, so can we set aside about 20 minutes for your presentation in total? Because we have 3 people, I want to be respectful to get them all in. Okay, second one, Hamilton Beachfront. Do you know how long that may take?
Have about 5 minutes of discussion from our end, and then any questions that anyone might have, we're happy to answer them.
Great. So could I say 15 minutes for that? Is that okay with committee? Okay. And the last one, we are so looking forward to speaking with you.
So glad to do about 5 minutes, it'd be
I
great.
think it'll be like 3 hours. We'll see how long that takes us, but I think to be generous to the committee, I'd say at least a half an hour. We've been waiting to meet you for a while. Say that. Well, we may go on till 9 o'clock tonight. All right, so point in time, would you like to start the presentation? Welcome and thank you for doing this.
Madam Chair, while we're just getting set up, wanted to point out that the PowerPoint presentation that was to be done is also been distributed to you in printed copy. Okay, so there are extra copies at the back as well for those who had just joined us, but it is before you as well.
Is that the one that's right here?
Yes.
Okay, it's okay, I can, that's fine. Is it going to be on the screen as well? Okay. Go ahead, please, Matthew.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me today to speak. So this here that I'm holding up is the document that was distributed. I'm going to try not to stick too firmly to this document presentation. I'm just going to sort of talk about what the point in time count is. So what the point in time count is an event that is taking place at the end of February. It's a federally mandated count. Essentially, it is addressing the homeless population. The federal mandate is more or less just simply looking at a count and basic demographics of those who are experiencing homelessness in our community. And the City of Hamilton has decided to take this opportunity to go one step further. And along with the roughly 5 to 10 questions that the federal government has mandated, we're adding an additional survey that is roughly 20 questions. And with that, we're going to gain a lot more information about the vulnerability that the people who are experiencing homelessness are facing as far as their health issues and other services that they may be needing. So with this event that's taking place at the end of February, we'll have a number of volunteers that will be helping us to do it. We're looking to do a couple of different methods of counting. We're going to be present in a number of shelters and neutral locations, neutral zones, hotspots that will be like rec centers, drop-in centers, and like I mentioned, shelters. We'll also be looking to address the unsheltered homeless population by actually doing some street outreach. We'll be canvassing the downtown core street area. We've also been in touch with the mental health street outreach program, and they have a number of locations throughout the city that they know there are people who are living rough, living outside, that we hope to engage to do this survey with them. So as I mentioned, it is at the end of February, February 21st and 22nd. That's a Sunday, Monday. The plan is to start surveying in the evening of the 21st. Then we will do some early morning surveying. About 5 a.m. we'll start. That's where we'll likely meet with most of the people who are living outside. And then we will probably do some Monday evening surveys as well. The evening, both on Sunday and Monday, are our best times to meet with those in the shelters. That's generally when they do their dinner meal and the intake process at the shelters. So as far as the basics of my presentation, that's really the core of it. I don't want to get into too much more useless information, so I would invite anyone to ask questions right now. Yes, I believe Paul.
Yeah. Once you've collected all this information, what do you do with it, and then what's the outcome of what you've collected?
Thank you for the question. So if I can reference back to a very similar thing that our program did in April of last year, it was the 20,000 Homes campaign. It was sort of a pilot of this type of a process. We did that vulnerability survey with a number of people experiencing homelessness. We just focused on the city core. We didn't go into the more rural areas, which we're planning on doing this time. What we did with that was identify the key piece that we were able to pull away from that was 110 people that we surveyed were identified as highly acute or having high vulnerability. The simplest explanation of that is these people would have likely faced death in the streets within a short period of time if they didn't have connections, interventions with some sort of services. And we, through identifying those individuals, were able to connect them with other services that are available in the city to get them off of the streets, to get them the services that they require. So that is the simplest thing that we want to do, but to go beyond that, we're also going to be evaluating the current programs that are being offered in the city to help direct our future efforts in reducing homelessness in the city. Now, because this is a federally mandated, it's actually the first nationwide point-in-time count activity that's happening. So the information that we will be gathering will be accumulated with other community information from across the country to give the federal government a more broader image of what homelessness really looks like in the country. And with that, they can hopefully help to shape some more policy and supports to the local communities to help us address the needs of our population. Yes?
I'm wondering how you, if there's been much thought or planning around those that are largely invisible, the ones that are couch surfing.
No, very good question. That's actually something that comes up quite a bit. So part of the federal mandate, they identified two types of homelessness to focus on, which is sheltered and unsheltered. The sheltered, they describe that as simply being part of the shelter system, emergency shelters. And then the unsheltered, of course, are those sleeping rough outdoors. But we are very mindful of the fact that there are a lot of hidden homeless. And those would be the people couch surfing, people who have their network of acquaintances that they're not necessarily welcome to stay in certain locations for more than a night or a couple of nights at a time. And you know, by definition, they are actually homeless. They don't have a place of their own. And we have the broader community across Canada that's looking to do this point-in-time count have looked at a number of different methods of engaging with those people, and the city's looking to try a couple of different things, such as these magnet events at neutral locations like the rec centers, where we have a little bit of communication that goes out, and people who may be experiencing homelessness but aren't in one of those key spots that we would otherwise meet them, they can come and meet with us. Follow-up, of course.
Yes, it's relevant. Having worked with the Campaign for Adequate Welfare and Disability, we did some work on the role of suspension letters related to homelessness, and the statistics are hard to come by, but upwards of 2,500 to 3,000 letters go out every month, cutting people off of social assistance at the end of the month. Sorry. See if I can get this powered up.
Side. To the front.
And in the front. Okay. So it's been identified that about 2,500 to 3,000 letters go out to individuals on social assistance, OW, every month that essentially cuts them off. The campaign worked hard for a couple of years to move those suspension letters to the middle of the month. There's been limited success in that. The result, though, is that it can greatly impact whether they can continue to live in the accommodation or are out of housing.
So I can't say too much to that, but I will say that there are a lot more people in the community that would be deemed precariously housed, or they're in a housing situation that is unstable, because by definition they, in that moment in time, don't meet the criteria of homelessness or homeless. We wouldn't be looking to capture them. However, the information coming out of people who were in a situation like that and have recently become homeless is part of the broader picture of what you're describing, and that information will hopefully get looked at in that same conversation of what best ways we can address stopping people from getting to be homeless. Our department does fund some programs that prevent homelessness, and there are a number of different things that I can't even get into detail on, that we keep things like that in mind when supporting these programs, because it is a well-known fact that there are a lot of people that are potentially one paycheck away from becoming homeless. But this particular point in time count won't be able to capture everyone.
Other questions? Mary and Terry? Was there a hand up over there?
Excuse my back, but that's the way the microphone is. Last spring, I attended the event out at Innovation Park about the SPDAT for the 20,000 homes. Is there a way that your department could come to this committee at a later date to explain that process that picks out how people are assessed for vulnerability?
I think that's a great opportunity for our department to share that information. I'll take that back to my department, and then in the coming year we can look to come back and do a presentation on that. I've been with my department for about 3 or 4 months now, so the depth of knowledge that other members of my team would have to explain that, I would like one of them to perhaps come back. But essentially the VI SPDAT, which is a thinned down version of the SPDAT, is what we will be adding to the point in time count. That's the VI initials at the beginning of it is vulnerability index. So it's a vulnerability index of the SPDAT, which I can't even recall what it means, but essentially it's an assessment tool to determine the level of need that an individual would have. So this one that we're doing, it's very simple. It requires very little training, the VI version. It's all just questions with yes or no answers. But as far as a more detailed description and presentation on the SPDAT, like I said, I'll bring that back to my department for us to be able to do it. It's just an acronym, SPDAT, and what it stands for, I don't recall exactly what it is, but essentially what it is it's an assessment tool that the shelters are using to assess the needs, the requirements, and the current level of competency, really, of different individuals that they're engaging with. A more detailed presentation would be beneficial, I think, yeah.
That's okay, Mary? Patty? I think you were next.
Patty, Jerry, we'll go ahead.
You guys
No look alike.
Two questions or sort of statements. One sort of ties into what Mary just asked. But is there any way when we start looking at the results, we'll be able to tell basically a percentage of homeless people who have disabilities, and basically how homelessness affects their disabilities, their ability to get treatment that they need, medical care, their ability to get medications that they need and whatnot, and how just sort of interesting to see how those two things interact, basically the number of people who are homeless who have disabilities and how homelessness is affecting their disabilities, whether it's, making the situation worse or better. Is that something that we'll be able to, is that anything that we'll be able to get out of that, or is that something that's being thought of?
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the questions that we'll be asking are based on different health situations that they're experiencing, whether it is a disability or a short-term ailment that they may have. Part of that does get aggregated together to get a broad picture of the percentage of people that are experiencing homelessness that do have disabilities that affect their day-to-day lives. We're hoping not just to get information out of this that will help our department with housing people and removing people from homelessness, but also to share this information with other networks that can engage with people and provide services for people. And healthcare is a big piece, not just physical disabilities, but other like mental disabilities as well are something that statistics do show. People who are experiencing homelessness have a lot of issues that they carry with them, and for the communities to be able to address the needs of those people, we have to be very mindful of what their needs are. It's not just needing money to pay rent to get a house. There's a lot more that comes with it, and health care is a very, very large piece of that. So when we do ask our questions in our survey, we are looking to ask some basic questions. We don't want to get too deep into asking people their entire history, but definitely to put some numbers together so that when we go back to re-engage with people or to do presentations to explain why we need the supports that we're fighting to save, that will be very useful for us.
And second question, just wondering, once all this is done, if there are any plans, or if anything can be done as sort of a public service, just to help people understand how people become homeless and why, and just the general public. At Christmas dinner, I ran into a really sort of horrible moment when my great nephew, who is 13, was bragging about he and his uncle were in a car, and they actually cut off these two people walking down the street who they thought looked like they were homeless. And the young child was very happy. He's bragging about the fact that he yelled out the window, "Why don't you guys get a home?" And I got a little bit upset about that, and I started to explain homelessness to him, why, how some people can become homeless, and I was cut off very quickly. They didn't want to hear about it. And I think there's a lot of people out there that have a horrible misunderstanding about homelessness and how people become homeless, and basically who can become homeless. I'm just wondering if there is any kind of a campaign or anything to help people understand the situation a little bit better.
Well, first of all, I appreciate your mindfulness of the situation and your respect to the fact that it is very true. A lot of people who are experiencing homelessness have gotten there for a number of different reasons. Part of this specific campaign, this event that we're doing here, the public piece to that, there is awareness, such as presentations that we're doing leading up to it, such as this one today. We're also engaging volunteers. So with that, the people who will be invited as volunteers to participate, they will be getting education pieces to go along with it. We're hoping that there will be a lot more awareness just from the fact that we're doing this, and we're being open about it. There's a lot more to come from that, of course. After the point in time count event is done, February 21st, 22nd, March 4th, I believe, which is a week Friday after that, so just shy of 2 weeks after the event takes place, we will be doing like a community debrief and sharing some information that we were able to gather from the surveys. It isn't as big of a public education piece as you're asking about, but I think the best that we can do is to continue to share positive fact-based information with each other, be very mindful of it, and to continue to remove the stigmas that are associated with homelessness. That's something that we know that there are stigmas associated with it, and running campaigns like this that are in the media, in the public space, helps to show that homelessness is something that is part of our community. It's an unfortunate thing that can actually be addressed and can be put an end to by hiding away from the information and not doing surveys like this to actually find out what the needs of people are. We won't necessarily remove some of those stigmas and some of those misconceptions. We're trying to get to the truth of it and then share that truth as best as we can. So hopefully that somewhat helps your question.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, Patty?
Do you know if, in your questioning, if one of the questions is where they're from? Like, and why I'm asking that is, after talking with a line bus driver between cities, it's a common known fact that one city will load so many on a bus and send them off to another city.
So specific to that, I don't know fact base about that, but anecdotally myself and when I was a university student and talking with different groups of people, I had heard very similar things. As far as the surveys go, we have actually debated that a fair bit about where people have come from. It's a difficult question to get completely on board with, because what we're struggling with is what does that really, how does that really help us? I mean, let's just assume that out of 1,000 people, that a couple hundred of them came from Guelph. The reason that they came from there is maybe they felt that the services in Hamilton were better. It doesn't change the fact that they're here now. So what their current needs are more important than where they came from. We are still juggling with it though, we're still considering it, because other communities have, in forums discussing the logistics of running this program, other communities have said that they want to do that, because some bigger areas, exactly that, feel that they are getting the download from smaller communities, or communities that aren't necessarily smaller but aren't running as suitable programs for those people. So they're immigrating into cities and municipalities that have different services. So I don't know at this time if we're going to ask a question like that, but it is something that we are discussing.
Yeah, and the other part of that is with a federal survey. Do you know what I mean? Like, my concern with that is, Hamilton going to be labeled, the city with the most homeless and stuff like that, where meanwhile they're coming from other cities that
I think
don't want to look after them, right?
Yeah, no, very good point. I think what we're hoping from this, being a federally mandated and being a nationwide program, is that a lot of other communities will participate and will show that many communities, large and small, have homelessness as an issue. Excuse me. With that, I mean, there's still going to be those people that travel, that move if they're capable. Sometimes it's because they have friends or family networks in a different community that they're trying to get close to. Some they're trying to get away from. Because of that, you're always going to have that. You can't really stop someone from choosing to travel to Hamilton or to Toronto or to go out west. For different reasons, people will do that. But by putting a nationwide perspective on homelessness, it will hopefully show a great deal about homelessness across the country, not just in the hot spots that run programs year-round. So hopefully that will help us.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments? Jared?
You said that, I don't know if you've already answered this, you said you're using volunteers to do the survey. I was just wondering, are you looking for volunteers? Do you have volunteers? I just wondering.
So this week we're launching the online registration for volunteers. So at this point in time, I think we've had like maybe a dozen people who have contacted us through email to say that they want to volunteer. And a number of the agencies that we fund, that we support throughout the year, they've already offered up some of their staff and their space to do it. So absolutely, volunteering is something that we're interested in. The way that we're going to do it is break out into a number of teams of 3 to 5 people. Each team will have a team lead, which could be someone who has a social working background. It could be someone who has mental health street outreach background or other type of healthcare supports. But generally, the team leads will be people with engaged experience, and then the rest will just be from general public volunteers. From this group here, I think more the fact that you are engaged citizens, that you are speaking on behalf of people, you're speaking to a lot of people, and you're an extension of council, or you report to council. I think the most important thing that we can hope from you is just the awareness and the support of what we're after. If any of you are interested in volunteering, I absolutely would invite you to participate. And if you'd like, once the online registration becomes available later this week, I can email it to someone who can distribute it to the work, Nancy. Perfect. And then I'll do that so that everyone can keep on top of what's going on.
Are they volunteer?
Excellent. I appreciate that. Thank you. So before I hand the microphone back over, if it's okay with everyone, if there are no more questions, if I could pack up and quietly leave.
Yes.
All right.
First,
Of course.
will you be getting any, will you be providing us with an update of the sort of results of what you're doing?
I actually, after a couple other presentations similar to this, where a similar question came up, I asked my manager, and although it's not already scheduled on your agenda or on our agenda, going above and beyond the community debrief that will happen March 4th, I think we would like to reach back out to each of these committees that we're meeting with to give a little presentation with some information that might be of interest to your specific group. I think that would be a good idea.
We would like that with you, permission?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate
Paul
it.
is going to be the chair for. Okay, motion to receive the presentation.
Who do I work for? Housing Services. My manager,
By
Amanda DeFalco.
Bob, all in favor? Aye. Carried. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the next thing we are going to talk about is the Hamilton beachfront. Well, if everyone said that. Anyway, Hamilton beachfront trail accessible washroom.
Thank you for having us here. I'm Robin and this is Melissa. And we're here from Facilities Management and Capital Programs. And we're here to talk about accessible washrooms on the Hamilton Beachfront Trail. And this includes a report that was included with the agenda. And also to answer any questions and really to help from a facilities perspective, that's what we're here for. And to provide information from a facilities perspective and answer any questions. So just to start off with a little bit of background on the report. The report was done in response to a petition, and it initially the report was presented to Public Works Committee, and through a motion from Councillor Collins, it was recommended to be reviewed by this committee. So I think it's important that this committee has this opportunity to review the report and ask any questions. And to give you an idea about the report itself, Facilities Management and Capital Programs are reporting back that we have successfully installed some push-button power door operators at the entrance doors for both male and female public washrooms at 1151 Beach Boulevard. And the solution addresses a petition by a concerned patron. It also allows us to exceed 1997 Ontario Building Code, which is the applicable code at the time that the facility was constructed. And it now brings the entrance doors in line with 2012 Ontario Building Code, and as amended also in 2013. So this means that the washroom door operators meet current standards for public washrooms that are newly constructed today. So that's a positive for us. And the public facility was deemed to be in compliance at the time that it was constructed, which was in coordination with the Hamilton Waterfront Trust. Our staff of our facilities team met with the patron because we wanted to make sure we better understood and addressed her concerns. And additional measures to improve accessibility are still in progress, so we've got some of those talked about in the report. And we examined each element of accessibility, and there's a table, a pretty informative table, and Melissa did a great job putting that together. And it talks about the different codes and how they've changed over time, and how this facility either complies or does not comply with certain elements. And so we're working on it. And so those are summarized in Appendix A, and that's Appendix A of the report. The report also expands into related areas of accessibility prioritization. So that involves our long-term planning across facilities across the city, and some of the funding strategies that we might consider, and we talk a little bit about that. Now, in follow-up to this report, I did speak with the concerned patron, and I wanted to make sure that I had her feedback on the report. And she gave me some feedback, we discussed it, and based on our conversations, without constructing a new facility at this site, which would be ideal from an accessibility standpoint, but not so much financially, the patron was just looking for a couple of other sites to be worked on, and those were looked after by Hamilton Conservation Authority. So Melissa and I actually have a meeting in the next couple of days with Hamilton Conservation Authority to make sure that we do address those two sites as well. And Councillor Collins has agreed to fund some of those solutions for us and for the city, and through some waterfront reserves that were applied in that sense. And so I guess through this report, before I take any questions, I just wanted to mention as well that there are some recommendations that come from this report, and looking to Nancy procedurally to know, based on the recommendations from this report, if this committee so decides and the recommendations go to council, what's the procedure for that? And of course I'll take questions after that.
So this has gone before the Public Works Committee, and they've asked that it come forward to ACPD for review and comment. So the comments will go back to Public Works for that specific reason, because it's a direction from that committee. However, they will also be entered into the minutes, which then move up to the General Issues Committee, as they normally would for any of the other minutes that this committee has.
Thank you. Just to summarize those recommendations, the recommendations relate to, first of all, ongoing improvements that we're doing at this particular site. And second of all, recommendation B was looking a little bit more long-term at the 2016 Strategic Renewal and New Construction Strategy, and really bringing accessibility priorities into that, and looking at accessibility as far as all of our investments go in the upcoming 10-year period. And then the third recommendation was to take it off of the outstanding business list. But beyond this, as I mentioned, I have been in conversation with the concerned patron, and we are looking to do some further improvements to other facilities that Hamilton Conservation Authority looks after in that beachfront area. So I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, we'll go through those questions. Mary?
I'm on the Seniors Advisory Committee as well, and I've worked with Melissa on the subcommittee, Transportation Subcommittee, because we're trying to encourage older people to go out in the community, but needless to say, you need to know where you gotta go to the washroom. And from that, I personally have discovered that what is designated as a wheelchair washroom is not necessarily big enough for a wheelchair. So in terms of the beach trail facility in particular, is the cubicle inside big enough for somebody to help me get from my wheelchair onto the pot? Or do I have to leave it outside? Because in your report you talk about a bicycle rack to attach a scooter to. And there are problems with dimensions between scooters and wheelchairs. as well as the maneuverability. So, the way I read the report, you tie up your scooter, then you go into the cubicle, so that sends a message that it's not big enough to take your mobility device into.
So I can start to answer.
It's a convoluted question, I know.
Sorry, I'll start to answer the question by starting with sort of what I consider to be the ideal, which is a facility constructed today would be the ideal. And that would have a universal washroom, which would have a large enough room, in my experience from seeing, for not only a wheelchair but also a scooter. So really that is the ideal, is building a facility today. But for facilities that weren't built today, unfortunately, and when we're looking at retrofits, we are limited as to what we can do and what we can't do. And my understanding is that they were limited to primarily wheelchairs. And even then, some of the accessibility requirements were a lot more limited than they are today. So we're doing the best to retrofit the facility, but creating space within an existing facility is something that we couldn't really figure out a good way to do. We are going to improve it, and that's one of the things that we're continuing to work on, to improve a way to turn around in the space. But that's one of the reasons, in speaking with the concerned patron, that she's hopeful that we'll do work at these two other facilities because they do have potential in terms of having enough room for a scooter. Scooter is a little bit bigger than wheelchairs, so having that room to turn a scooter around is a lot more challenging, which is why we've set aside somewhere. One of her concerns was security-wise, as somebody taking the scooter. So that was the sort of the best we could do under the circumstances at that facility, understanding that looking at these other two facilities is very important for this patron, because most likely she'll be able to go into those other two facilities with her scooter.
Also in the report, it talks about 85 facilities in various parks and whatnot. Is there a list available of where exactly we could go? Because the Seniors Advisory Committee are encouraging people to do the bike trails and whatnot, so we want to know if a bicycle can go, can wheelchairs go, and if wheelchairs can go, is there a washroom en route?
It's something that we can work together with parks to make sure that we're not only giving you a list of facilities that we have, which we do have a list of facilities, but also a list that's opened at appropriate hours for what you're looking for, because Parks is a group that we work closely together with, who goes to the facilities, opens them up for the day, and then closes them up at the end of the day for security reasons. So we can work together with our partners to make sure we put together a good list for you.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Well,
Patty?
I don't think I need a mic, eh?
No.
So,
You are right.
I'm not familiar with 1151 Beach, and I'm looking at your map, so I know it's not down, I live out near Winona, so it's not down my way. It looks like where is it?
It's closer to the lift bridge.
So, is it on the cusp of Burlington actually, or?
Kind of like, there's where it's on the Hamilton side of the lift bridge.
And what's there? Like,
When I drive down the road, there's lots of houses. That's pretty much it, because it's right on the trail.
and they've just put a washroom on this trail, right?
Yes, if you take a look at the Appendix B, there's a little map there that hopefully it's still hard to gauge what's around it, but you can at least gauge.
This?
Correct, yeah, you can at least gauge where the A marker is.
Yeah. But there's no other buildings there.
I think the primary use of, or the primary purpose for that washroom, when it was initially put in several years ago, was for the trail use. Was for patrons using the trail.
It also has access to the beach for surfers, and there's like a exterior shower as well, and a covered canopy picnic area.
Oh, so it is around something like.
And a parking lot,
It's-
excuse me, and a big parking lot in front, and there's a center path, yeah, it's just down the way from there
Okay,
as well.
just,
So there's lots of reason to use it.
Okay.
I believe in the summertime, it's something I could ask my colleagues in parks, but it gets used quite a bit. A lot of trail users make use of that washroom in the summer.
Anybody else? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you
I
for
don't
having
think
us
I
here.
don't think I've ever been down there.
Well,
Yes.
sorry. Is there anything that we can do from our committee here?
One of the things we'd like to do, working with you, is when we do come back later this year, hopefully later this year, with at least a phase one of our strategic renewal strategy, and when we do talk about some of the costs associated with bringing AODA into the capital strategy, we'll just be looking for support in terms of funding opportunities for those types of considerations, making those improvements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could just interject really quickly. So the Public Works Committee has referred this committee. Okay, so this report went to the Public Works Committee, and they in part have referred it to yourselves as the ACPD to provide some feedback back to the committee itself. So nothing's happened with this report and recommendations as of yet. They are waiting for your feedback. So this would be the appropriate time, if you have anything to provide staff with, that they can go back and say, these were the comments that were provided by the ACPD. This would be the time to do it. And you can do that through general comments, or you can do that through a motion. If there are no further comments, then I would look to dispose of this matter through a motion just to receive it. So I'm at your discretion.
Well, can I?
Go ahead, Patty.
Go on, Patty, I have no idea, so.
Okay, reading all the information on here, I still had to ask, like, what, because if I'm not down there using that trail, and not everyone does, so they won't know what's exactly around there, so I think it needs some kind of information there.
I'm familiar with it, man. It's on the Hamilton side of the lift bridge. There's a big parking lot. It's an access to the trail. I don't believe there's another washing facility until you're down near the water treatment plant, near Hutchins. So there is one washing facility between a lift bridge. It's at the lift bridge side and near the Hutchins location. So it's an access point. A lot of people like to go there to go down the pier at the lift bridge. And as I say, there's also a cenotaph, World War II cenotaph nearby, which gets a lot of use, a lot of visits as well. So it's, I'm just trying to think if there's another parking area. Actually, there are no parking areas from what in my memory, between the lift bridge and the water treatment plant, or the Hutchins location. So it needs to be accessible for sure.
But I'm not quite sure what kind of feedback they're looking for. That's what I'm.
Are they looking for, sorry,
Okay, Tom.
I've been in the facility, made use of that facility, and it's been a couple of years since I've been in there, but I don't recall that the stalls are have a turning radius big enough for a chair. But that has to be looked at.
It's hard to sort of get a real picture of it just from what we've got here. Is there any way that you have blueprints or anything that we would be able to look at, that would be able that could be sent to us or something to get an idea?
That's something that we did do when the concern was brought to us. We did go there and, because, at the time, that building was a part of our facility, so we didn't have blueprints for it, so I did go and do a site measure. So we do now have a plan of it, as well as that we have, quite a few pictures of the facility and the surroundings. But we could add it or attach it.
We can do that. There's also a summary of the findings of just in the chart. I know it's in chart form, so it's not ideal, but it describes what is compliant and what isn't compliant. And so with the chart, we're just to follow up with all the items that are not compliant.
And is there, I know I haven't seen, I don't know if there's any room, but the one thing that seems to be missing, I don't know if it's possible to have an adult change table.
No, this facility is just your standard washroom facility where there's a few individual stalls and one barrier-free stall. It's not a universal washroom where it does have the turning circles within inside it. You have your barrier-free 5 foot by 5 foot square with all of your accessories and equipment inside. It's pretty basic compared to today's standards.
Patty? Will you just ask?
Are you
I'm
with
just
us?
wondering if we should deal with this further at Bill.
Built environment.
Well, yeah, I still think we need more time to look at this.
I'd really like to see a blueprint, because it's hard to see from looking at the chart. You really need to see a blueprint to see if there's anything
If it
that
can
needs.
be added to our agenda
Yeah.
for next.
Mary?
The summary and discussion alluded to 85 other facilities of similar type. And I guess the question becomes one of what state are they for meeting this criteria as well? And so do we have a role in understanding that and giving some direction for any future changes and amenities?
Madam Chair, if I just might assist, I think the idea here is the Public Works Committee brought this particular report back to this level, being specifically dealing with 1151 Beach Boulevard. So I think if we're going to go into the other 85 facilities, I think that would be a completely different agenda item. I think they're looking at feedback with respect to the recommendations that are provided in this report specifically. If the committee requires more information, certainly this can come back to, say, next month, or if the blueprints are available, or whatever information staff needs to put together, we can work on that timing and bring it back so that I can review it a little more thoroughly. I'm not sure how quickly council's looking to get this back, but I think it should be on our radar to get this reviewed as quickly as possible. So,
Put it on those environments then, at the end of the month.
keep in mind that, again, it would have to report back to the ACPD level. Everybody would be, right, and everybody would have to be comfortable with what's coming forward as far as comments back to council.
If it's put on a built environment for February, we can report back for the February meeting of ACPD,
Yeah,
if that's
I think that would.
amenable.
Probably.
Yeah. So can we do that? Are you ladies gonna come to the built environment? Could you come to the built environment?
It's the first Tuesday.
So the invitation is for staff to attend.
Yes.
Um,
Would be
I
the
re-
first Tuesday.
I'm away returning February 3rd.
Oh.
So I think that's the Wednesday. What time of day is it?
Same time as this.
Same time as this year. No.
4:30 to 6:30.
I apologize. I won't be in the country.
Oh,
But can she not?
Melissa.
Melissa, not
Melissa?
I'm well versed on the building and the codes and stuff, but the interaction between like management and council, I'm not very good at speaking on that.
One of the things you definitely can do is provide the blueprints. We've got them here. We can provide them. So, and it's something we want you to have a level of comfort with. So we'll find a good time to come back and present to you, and then bring it back to ACPD again as well.
Patty?
I'd still like to see Melissa bring the blueprints to built environment, then we can work on it there.
And then think about this.
Yeah, okay, so,
Everybody in favour of that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna hand it back to our chair. Let me think.
Madam Chair, can I just ask staff, would it be then in that case that was suggested, would it be okay? Because if that scenario that was suggested is followed through, the comments would be going back until probably March or April. Because the working group would have to then report up to this group, and then the comments from this group would then proceed to the committee.
So I can't
I can't speak. Yeah, no, that's a good question. I can't speak from the councillor's perspective. I'm not sure his timelines, but I know that in speaking with the concerned patron that we're working to address her concerns in parallel with the committee reporting. So we're addressing her concerns, and that's her main objective. So I think as far as the patron is concerned, we're meeting that objective. And then in terms of giving this committee a level of comfort, I think that's important too. So I think we're achieving both of those objectives.
So is the plan that Melissa will go to built environment?
So we can send Melissa to built environment. We'll make sure there's management there as well. And if there are any detailed questions that require further follow-up, then we can follow up on those. I get back the next day, so.
Okay. Mary, I see your hand up, but we're really way out of time. I apologize for that. Is it something just really quick?
Yes, last month I gave Paula the draft copy of the report from the Seniors Advisory Committee, Transportation. And in it, it's recommending that SAC, through the Transportation Subcommittee, recommends that the location of all public toilets be put on the city's website as well as on the seniors page with information as to the accessibility features.
If you don't mind, could you take that to the built environment committee and deal with it at that point?
Okay.
Because that sounds like it's relevant for discussion. Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. Motion to receive the presentation.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just a correction. It would be a motion to refer to the built environment.
Oh,
Subcommittee.
Okay, we need a motion. Okay. Okay, moved by Paula, seconded by Tom. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Do we still need a motion to accept the presentation? Our thanks. Thank you, and we'll see Melissa next month.
Thanks for having us here.
thank you very much.
Okay. How do you say your last name?
It's lean dirts.
Lean?
Lean dirts. Just break it in half. Lean and then dirts.
Okay.
Just call me Ken. It's easy.
I just hope your budget isn't lean.
It is. Actually.
All right. With no further ado, I don't think you have a presentation, right?
No, I don't. But thank you very much for inviting me here, and because it's actually a great opportunity as we are moving forward in licensing to look at the whole issue of accessible taxi cabs. I can give you a bit of an overview of where we are to date, so everyone kind of knows where we are to date.
Could you also tell us what's on the horizon, like the very near horizon?
And we can tell you what's on the horizon. You're right, because right now we are in the process of rewriting the business licensing bylaw, and which Schedule 25 is actually the taxi licensing schedule. And we've actually hired a lawyer from Windsor. She actually lives in Burlington, but she articled it with Windsor City. And she is our senior project manager that will be working with all the communities as we go through each specific schedule. Taxis, of course, is probably the biggest, the Goliath of the schedules to work on. And so we're looking at kind of what's happening throughout the country before we actually go after and try to make the changes. To give you an overview of kind of where the taxi industry is right now, as a licensing agency, the city is the licensing agency, we give the license to the operators, but we don't control the business. We can license them and we allow them to operate, and we make sure that they're operating according to the rules of the city. There are currently 447 licensed taxi cabs in the city. Out of that 447, 16 are classified as accessible. And I remember that if you look back, it was this committee that made the recommendations to move forward, and in 2013, 16 vehicles or licenses were released. Since that time before that, there has been no additional licenses. So there has been no additional taxis approved that have not been accessible. So just to let you know, the industry is transforming right now. There's a transformation going on because of Uber. Uber has had a significant impact on the taxi industry, and we've had numerous dialogues with the two brokers that are out there that are currently providing the service. Uber is changing the way the transportation network is existing, from the applications to how they work and to operate. And as you know, Uber is not licensed. And there is dialogue at every level, in particular at the provincial level right now, with legislation that is currently in the second reading to look at the whole concept of shared economy. And so eventually, if I look at the horizon, in 2 years, we will probably see that either the province will license operations and applications like Uber, or they will mandate the city to license them. But right now, they do not fit within our current licensing structure. And so there's lots of issues that we've had discussions at council and certainly with the taxi industry, because they feel that Uber, being unlicensed, is an unlevel playing field. And so there's lots of discussions in that. So that's kind of what's happening in the community as far as taxi cabs. Last year was a bit of a transition year too. We actually took one of the operators to tribunal because was not performing to our expectation. There was lots of safety issues, and that person lost his license and took 50 plates out of the operation, and so those plates have now been brought back in. But during this whole transition period, both brokers also had numerous plates where drivers said, I can't make a living anymore, I don't want my plate anymore, and so they were just kind of shelved. And so there's been a whole transition that we're working through. It's starting to settle, and that's the good thing, because that gives us opportunities to grow, in particular the accessible taxis that we're looking for. So as I said, we're in the process of rewriting our bylaw, and we're very excited about that. But the bylaw was created back in 2007 when the city amalgamated. And so you've got pieces of Ancaster, you got pieces of Dundas, you got pieces of Glanbrook and Stony Creek that brought in the licensing bylaw in relation to taxis altogether. And it works, but it doesn't work. It's not modernized. So we're hoping to modernize it, look at best practices that we're seeing throughout the country. In particular, Calgary, Edmonton has got some great models, but this is happening right across Canada. Ottawa's going through it right now. Guelph has gone through it. So we're with that flow of the modernization of the taxi bylaws. Just so you know, we have 1,200 drivers that are currently licensed with the city. So 447 cabs, 16 which are accessible, 1,200 drivers that actually drive part-time or full-time. And out of that, there's 162 that have had special training in accessible driving of a taxi. So if you want to be a driver of an accessible cab in the city of Hamilton, you need to have this special 4 days of training. And so we know there's 162 of them. There's 2 brokers, and when I talked to both brokers, I actually spoke with them today about the accessible issues. Hamilton actually has 6 vehicles that are accessible, and Blue Line has 10. And some of their issues they have is that how many trips do they do a year? And I know we were doing a calculation over the last year and a half since we issued these licenses, and we're looking at an average of reported trips they're doing is about 610 a month. That's an average. of ones that are reported. And I say those are the ones reported because both brokers are telling us that they call it lockout, but it's actually priority service. What happens is they get clients, and the accessible drivers have clients, and they're called directly. And so if you know that this driver treats you very well, you get his phone number, you call him directly, and you get a ride from them. So that's certainly one of the issues. When we look at it, because we have a licensed mechanic that inspects every taxi cab twice a year. One thing that Nick did, he's our licensed mechanic, is we realized that we need to do a better job on accessibles. And so we actually got a couple wheelchairs donated by the hospital, and part of the assessment when we check the safety of the vehicle, they now have to demonstrate to us that they can properly secure the wheelchairs if in fact, when they bring this vehicle down. The one thing we're seeing though is that because the drivers, 162 drivers, aren't doing a lot of work, they've lost that skill. And so one of the things we're realizing is that even though there's a small amount of drivers, their skill set in actually fastening wheelchairs in these accessible vehicles is poor. So we need to do a lot more work in that. One of the other issues that we've had is that when I speak to the brokers, they say that because the vehicles are so costly, it costs them around $35,000 to outfit one of these vehicles, they don't have any spares. So when one of them breaks down, that means we're down to 15. I spoke to one of the brokers today. One person that owns the vehicle is away out of the country, and the other one was sick. So out of that brokerage, only 4 were on the road today. And so that becomes a problem. And so we need to make sure that there's sufficient vehicles out there to make sure we're servicing our community. So there is work to do, but it's so appropriate that I was asked to come today because we've been looking at this for the last couple months now that the industry has settled down. And actually in October I had a meeting with both brokers, and we asked, is there enough vehicles on the road? And of course one broker feels that there is, but the other broker says no. If we had more, we could service more. And we think that it's time that we need to release more licenses out to the community. And so I thought that was good news. I know I talked to our officers that are on the street that deal with taxis on a regular basis, and also our mechanic that deals with them, and I asked them the same questions because they're the ones dealing with the drivers. And the drivers that are operating the accessible taxis are busy, and they feel that there is sufficient work out there. And of course everybody wants to keep all the work to themselves, but I think if you build them, they will come. And so certainly we've been putting our minds towards, in the licensing department, that maybe it's time to release more licenses. It wasn't the time a year ago when Uber came and all the licenses were sitting on the shelf, because no one would invest in that kind of upfront investment, $35,000 to $40,000, plus buy the license to actually operate. But now we believe there's an opportunity. So that's kind of where we are. There's a lot of work to be done, but it's certainly something that I want to bring forward to this committee, is that there's still some work to be done and some research to do, but before our licensing bylaw is completely rewritten, I think we have to do a stopgap. And so over the next 2 to 3 years, I would like to move forward with issuing additional accessible taxi licenses to the priority list so that we can get some more accessibles out there. And right now, and this is roughly, we're thinking is 6 a year for the next 3 years. That's kind of where we like to move forward with. You know, in reality, can I take someone that currently has a license plate and say you must be accessible? There's such an investment in there that, you know, unless you could find a financial incentive for them to spend $35,000 or $40,000 on a vehicle, that's not going to happen. So that's kind of where we are. I'm glad to answer any questions and tell you where we think we're going. There's no solutions, but I'm looking for your comments and guidance in this. Thank you.
So, I'm going to start out with just a short statement, and then Paula has her hand up, Mary, and I'll check out the rest. We all make mistakes, and when this committee said that they didn't want 100%, I think it was a mistake. That's all I want to say. Go ahead, Paul,
Um,
and then,
Okay, the Hamilton CAP have 8 MV1s, which are scheduled by DARTs. Are they licensed taxis?
Darts?
No, the MV1s that Mr. what's his name from Hamilton CAP has.
Yeah,
Yes.
the ones that are not taxis. He actually, and that's something that we don't license at all. Those are vehicles that are supported by DARTs and are paid for to fill the gap for that. But there's something that, those are issues that are excluded from the licensing bylaw.
Okay, so those ones he has are not licensed taxis.
No.
So he has 6 others that are, or whatever, that are licensed taxis that are accessible.
he also has Bet's cabs or the
Yeah.
darts vehicles, so they're all kind of livery, is that right? It would be like a livery system.
So the ones he lets start schedule are not taxis.
They are not taxis and they're excluded from the taxi bylaw.
Okay. So the other ones that he does have are licensed taxis, right?
The ones that are currently valid license that has been given to the city to operate as a
Right.
taxi, Hamilton has 4, or has 6.
Yeah.
And, but the ones that are operated by one of the presidents of Hamilton, that are supported by DARTs are completely separate and are not licensed under the bylaw. And it's an interesting comment, and I don't know where it sits, but both brokers said that if in fact DARTs were not offering the same months, they believe they could fill in the gap.
And exactly what
And
he told
then
me.
that's certainly, they think they can do that, but I mean,
Yeah.
I don't control the DARTs organization or anything like that. My job is strictly to deal with licensing.
And they both told me that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting comment that I make, and I apologize, but they said that as the demand increases, it becomes much more valuable for them to actually to get licensed and to operate these things, and they feel that they can provide better service because there'll be a market there for them.
And the other question is, are they going to put out any more licenses for accessible taxis in the next year?
Well, this is certainly what I would like to move forward to, and I still have to do a little research, but I mean, in the long run, we need to rewrite the bylaw. But what I would like to move forward with, and it would be to do an additional 6 for the next 3 years, making a total of additional 18, which would give you a total of throughout the city of 34. So, I mean, but that, of course, obviously has to be approved by council, and I still have to do more research, but it looks to me, from the comments I'm having with the brokers and the officers on the street, that there is a need, and there's enough work for them that we could actually do that.
Mary?
No, I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to turn around. And
I can come up close.
You can come up close. In terms of, you talked about the training, that the hospital gave you wheelchairs
Yes.
to see how they tie down. Unfortunately, not all the taxis have the space for those of us who have elevating leg rests. So we need to, as you say, have a private arrangement with whichever one has the space.
Yes.
But I think into your parameters for training, they need to understand, because some of the drivers really don't understand. If you're visually impaired, you can't see this black barrier you're coming up to. Some of them don't know that they can move the bench forward, but I have to commend the one taxi that took me to a convention in Toronto. Your office found one that I could recline my wheelchair and lie flat all the way to Toronto. That's a piece of information that needs to be known up front, because a lot of us go to conventions in Toronto. And it's like us talking about the waterfront washroom. Well, not everybody knows what you can use and what you can't use. So publicity has to be better. But one of the other awful things is you go to phone a taxi and nobody can come. Or, as happened when I was out with Terry one time, my wheelchair stalled on the road, and thank goodness they came and were able to take me home with my chair on manual as versus electric. These are commendations and complaints. I can balance them off. I use the taxis fairly regularly.
Well, and you know, it's an interesting point because last year, a council approved our licensing department to create 2 enforcement divisions. We have the bricks and mortar one, which looks after, you know, hotels and restaurants and all that. But we now have a mobile licensing division, and that's where we have an officer, and we also have the mechanic, and we had an officer, and we're in the process of hiring a second officer that's also a mechanic that can do these spot checks. And so with that mobile unit, we talked about it today. We're actually going to do some spot, and so we can bring in the accessible vehicles and say, all right, show us how you can do this. Not only do they do it twice a year during their inspections, but making sure that they fully understand, because from the conversations I had with our officers and the brokers, because they don't, the 162 drivers that are out there don't drive on a regular basis, they lose that skill set. So the more they drive and the more vehicles that are out there, I think we'll get better service.
Could I ask you, what's an officer? What are you referring to when you say officer?
When I talk about officers, I have licensing officers. And so they're not police officers, they are bylaw officers, but they focus strictly on licensing issues. So we can make sure that people have proper licenses and all that. We have officers that go and check on taxis and food trucks and limousines to make sure that they're safe for the community.
Okay. Other questions? Patty?
Hi.
Hi, Patty.
The taxis are licensed.
Yes.
And I'm talking about the accessible ones. How many drivers are actually trained?
162 actually have the 4 days of training to be accessible drivers. But as I was saying to Mary, because they don't use the skill that often, they lose it. And so that's the one thing we need. We always refresh them when we do their biannual inspection, when they bring their vehicles in for the safety check. We test them to make sure that they still know how to do it, but they're not as proficient at it as we would like to see them.
Because in the community, I'm, old, that when they call for an accessible taxi, there's never one available. And when you get down to the details, it's the driver that's trained for that is not on right now. So, like, is it one driver per shift, or?
It's whoever runs the plates. So the plates, we have a different system in Hamilton where you could actually own the plate and operate the taxi. Then there's people that have owned the plate and then have someone work for them, and those are the ones, they're called multiples. They're the ones that have people that drive 24/7, because if I owned a plate, or all 400 people owned plates, nobody would want to work weekends or evenings, right? And so these multiples actually really promote having drivers working 24/7, and those are where we need to really look at making sure that someone that owns one of those accessible plates has sufficient drivers to provide the service. There's no sense having an accessible vehicle if you're only going to drive 4 days a week. You need it at all times so that we're giving better service. 16 is thin. I agree with you. 16 is far too thin, but I think it was the wedge in the door, and I think that it's something that we can build on. Interesting enough, with Uber and Lyft and all these other things, they're not mandated to have accessible vehicles. Although, there's a push from the government in the United States to say, hey, if you're going to be licensed, you're going to need this. And something we can do in the future when we look at licensing them, we can maybe force them to have a percentage that are accessible. But I think we got the wedge in the door. We've got 16. I like to move forward and try to get more so we can see what the impact is. As I said, 610 rides a month. That's kind of the average that we're seeing out there. You got to understand, our officers also we had one operator that was declining accessible rides. And we saw a trend that, because those are all systems that we monitor in licensing, and we actually brought that driver in and said, listen, if you're gonna start declining, you know, what's a valid reason, and if you don't have a valid reason, we'll take your license away from you, we'll take you to
So
tribunal.
interestingly, they've gotten around that by not showing up. They don't decline, they just don't show up.
Yeah.
And I'm a frequent user of
Yep.
taxis, and it's like worse than darts, pardon the
Yep.
expression. It's like I can't seem to get anywhere, no matter how early I booked, no matter how many times I confirm. And the story always is, well, we don't actually own taxis. The drivers can decide whether they come or not. So, question, is there any way for you to monitor, or your department, to monitor if any of these taxis are turning down trips because it's too far and they don't want to lose $4 in gas to do an $8 trip? That's just one.
Yes.
How frequently are they taking non-accessible passengers? Is there any way of monitoring these things? Because like, I think there's a huge problem with your wedge. Not your wedge, our wedge.
No, and I
It's just
agree
not
with you.
working.
I agree with you. I think when I talk to both brokers, I mean, they brag about their dispatching systems, that they're the state of the art, and they're all working towards creating these apps that are similar to Uber. But it's something I asked them for lately is that we need a system to track these versus a manual system, because we were using a manual system where every time it was denied, then we see a pattern. But the brokers have systems to say if someone's denied or if they don't show up, because if they don't show up, you should be calling the brokerage and say, I booked a trip, he didn't show up, and then what happens is they'll send it to us and we'll send one of our
I
investigators.
doubt it very much. So when they don't show up, I keep calling.
Yeah.
When are they coming? When are they coming? Well, we haven't been able to dispatch it. Today, so I'll give you a little history,
Sure.
and it's a personal story. Not that personal, but still, it happened to me. So Blue Line keeps telling me that between 2 and 4, they're really busy with the school rides. So today, I wanted to come here for a 2:30 meeting. I booked with the Hamilton cab for a 2 o'clock pickup. Oh, there shouldn't be any problems, okay? 2 o'clock comes and goes. 2:15 comes and goes, and they're telling me they don't have anyone yet. 2:25, they say they don't have anybody, and now they've asked Blue Line to do it. And at, what time was it? About 5 minutes to 3, a Blue Line cab showed up. This is the Blue Line cab that apparently isn't available between 2 and 4. I mean, the whole thing is ludicrous. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten all bundled up, got my dog ready, got everything ready, and I sit, and I sit, and I call, and I call. They're totally aware that I'm not getting picked up. But they're not saying we're not gonna pick you up. They're just saying we're still working on it. I don't know how to make it work, but there's a problem.
I think additional vehicles will help,
I
but I also think you're
100%
right.
would eliminate a lot of problems.
What's that?
I think 100%
Yes.
would eliminate a lot of problems. There would be people around Ancaster when I need a ride,
Yeah.
instead of calling someone
Yeah.
from Stony Creek or downtown.
I think it's certainly something we can look at as we write that new bylaw. You know, I'm hearing you that there has to be a solution, and there has to be a trigger that makes accessible rides our priority versus a regular pickup. And just like the police have a priority response system, perhaps the brokers need a priority response system so that when it's accessible, it's a priority one, and then nothing else gets booked. That's something we could look at in writing into this bylaw, that you know, the systems are there. They have the computer systems. I mean, if the police can do it, anyone can do
But
it.
the
Make it a
problem-
priority system.
Sorry, but the problem is the computer, everything is in place, and everything is state-of-the-art, but when it comes down to it, the cab doesn't pick it up,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they don't wanna go very far. Like, you know, they've got people right there and then that they can pick up and take somewhere and make money. So I honestly can see it from their perspective, and I think 100% would resolve issues from both sides. And as a committee, we've talked about transparency and really understanding what the issues are with the cab companies and really understanding what the limitations of your end of the work is and the bylaws and even monitoring and even enforcing what the bylaw says. And I'm hoping that we can pull that off, get more information and try to understand. And maybe help with figuring out how to fix things or make them work.
Both of those guys that I talked to before Christmas told me that if somebody calls for an accessible taxi, it is a priority.
It's supposed to be.
Well,
Which
it is.
means it gets dispatched. Whether
Yeah.
somebody picks it up or not, they have no control.
Yeah,
That's
but
what
they
he
should be
said.
able to
He
assign
said
it.
they don't own the car, so they don't know, but they said it's supposed to be a priority.
But they should be able to assign it, if the system is correct, we go systemizing and assign it, and then the person shouldn't be able to get a call until that call is completed. It's something that I need to explore with the brokers, and look at a priority system where it becomes, that no other calls are given until that one's been handled.
So just as a statement, as someone using a wheelchair and having limitations in transportation, hoping that accessible taxis would cost more, but at least they would give me opportunities, it hasn't worked. Hasn't worked at all. Other comments or questions? I feel like I dominated it.
No,
Terry,
please.
please, Terry.
Please.
It'll be good, go.
Two questions. Well, first one is a comment, is one thing that I've noticed that happens quite frequently in taxis, is the drivers get lazy. It's not that they're losing the skill set, they get lazy. They figure that I'm just as safe with 3 tie downs instead of 4. You know, we've got 3 wheels tied down, the other one's not gonna go anywhere. Well, not quite. Or they're under the impression that everybody in a wheelchair wears a seatbelt to start with, so why do we need to put the one on? Well, not everybody does wear a seatbelt, and seatbelts on our wheelchairs aren't crash tested, so they're not gonna do anything in an accident. But drivers do tend to get lazy, and they do seem to like to hook up 3 restraints instead of 4, or they'll not want to put the belt around you, and they get, if you say, I'd like to be hooked up properly, they tend to get a little annoyed. The other thing I'm wondering about is at what point are the drivers supposed to start the meter? Do they do it when they get out of the car to get you and put you in, or are they supposed to wait until you're actually in and secured?
They have to get you in.
I believe, just like any passenger, that they shouldn't start it until
You're in.
you're in and ready to go.
They do, and
They
they
do.
even said that they're supposed to.
Really.
And
That's
that
what it
happens very frequently.
Okay, well, that's a good thing for me to know, and I'll let the officers know, but something we'll need to do on an educational basis when.
That seems to be the most common practice, is for them to pull up, get out of, start the meter, get out of the vehicle, and then get you in.
That's a great point. Appreciate that very much, Terry, and we'll have a look at that.
I might ask a question again. So when Fletcher was working there,
Yes?
he encouraged us to call that number and to leave incidents, like report incidents.
Yep.
And I've done that a couple of times and had no feedback. Is that still a good thing to do? And should I expect someone to call and say, we got your message or something?
What number are you calling? Sorry.
I'm
Was
sorry, I
it
don't
his
have it
number?
with me.
Was it his personal number?
No, I don't know.
Was it maybe the taxi number?
I usually
Marie?
call
He gave
City
us
Hall
his
and they
card.
put me through.
Oh, maybe it was Al's number.
Yeah,
Yeah. You know what?
it was Rita Nazi before that, with the
Rita-
combination. and
Yeah,
then-
Rita
But
and all
we need
that.
to distribute the proper number.
You know what? And we will. We'll next. We'll talk about that tomorrow, and because we do have a complaints line that we can bring into there, and that might be the most appropriate. But you're right. You should be getting a call back. Say thank you very much. We got the message, and we've assigned that to an officer.
Just to acknowledge that it was received, because it seems like it goes into the cyberspace or something.
Yes. No. I appreciate the comments there. Thank you.
Do you have any records of the complaints and numbers and?
Yes.
No, yes?
Yes, we do. I mean, it's an interesting. the one broker we were looking after, all the complaints came to us individually, and then the other broker said that they wanted to look after all their complaints themselves, running the appropriate business. What we have done now is asked for, we receive complaints all the time, either from a counselor or through the chain of command, and like someone calls Cindy's desk and they'll get it to us and we'll investigate those. But traditionally what we've got is a good working relationship with the brokers. So if they get a driver that perhaps is acting uncivil or is not taking the right rides, they're contacting us and we assign that to an officer. So we are getting that information. But you know, we get 300 complaints a year. You know, the driver was unkept, didn't like the look of the inside of his cab. Those kind of complaints, but the ones where lack of service, those are the ones we need to act on.
And I'd say that it's probably better if you received all the complaints. I think it would be more objective if you received all.
It would. I don't think council could afford the additional officers to investigate all the complaints. That's the problem. You're probably looking at 600 to 700 complaints a year. And that's just one of the 9,000 licenses that we actually have, or the 29 different schedules. So, but I think the most serious ones need to come to us.
Tom?
Would it be appropriate to have a complaint structure set up for accessible taxis that you get?
Yeah, and I actually think that might be a good point, Tom, that maybe we let the brokers know if they receive a complaint of accessible, then they must filter that through us, and then we also keep a standard file, plus with the combination of the phone numbers to this committee on complaints. I think that would work well.
How about an email?
Just
Go ahead, Tom.
Terry can probably tell this story better, but we had a situation where the city staff pre-booked accessible cabs to a conference where we were extolling the virtues of accessible cabs, and one of them didn't show up, and we wound up having to take HSR home. To Mr. Fletcher's credit, he did acknowledge the complaint, never went any further than that.
I think it was more than that too, is that what happened when the taxi didn't show up is that we phoned to figure out what was going on, and the person we talked to on the phone from the cab company was extremely condescending, was not polite, talked to us like we were basically 2-year-olds who didn't have the slightest idea what was going on, tried to give us, I can't remember exactly what excuses, but the excuses we were being given, we were very aware were not true. That they're telling us, so, well, the rules are this, the rules, and, you know,
Yeah.
we knew that they weren't true. We knew that we were being, screwed around quite a bit. And, just the fact that the city books us, we're in Burlington at a conference on AODA success stories, and I was giving a presentation on transportation in Hamilton, talking about how nice it was that we had these cabs. And, then they don't show up. We call to find out. They're extremely rude to us. They basically BS us.
One of the two companies could really benefit from customer service language. It's horrible. No, truly, truly, very, very rude, very abrupt, very condescending.
It's not just people that are in wheelchairs either. When I call a taxi, most taxis sit at the bottom of your driveway, blow the horn and expect you to go out, right? Well, I have vision loss, so I'm not going to do that. Could be anybody's car, I can't. God knows where I'll be going. Anyway, but a lot of them won't come to the door, even when you ask.
And you bring a good point, because this is some of the discussions we've had from a management team with the two brokers, that with Uber coming in and corporations similar to Uber, that the taxi industry needs to reinvent themselves, because they need to be providing quality service that is above and beyond. Because, why would you want to take anything else if you're not getting that service? So greeting you at the door, opening the door, helping you with parcels, whatever, generally. And to that reason, we have actually worked with the Taxi Academy that actually develops the training processes for us. And the next year or two, we're focusing in on customer service. That seems to be the area that needs to be most improved. So I appreciate your comments on that. And it just reaffirms with what we've already said, customer service needs to be some of the focus that we need.
And then you get some that go over and above, but
Yes.
it's
And those
very
are the ones
rare.
you call back, and those are the ones that get a tip.
Exactly,
So,
exactly.
I mean, this is what you want, and for them to maintain their viability and be in competition, they need to provide great quality service.
And because I can't sleep, finding a driver that I feel safe with, because, you know, if it's dark, I don't know where the hell he's taking me.
Yeah.
I mean, he should take me anywhere and drop me off anywhere, because I can't, you know, direct him, so, you know, and some of them are horrible to be honest. Just a comment.
Jerry?
This one last, this happened to me a little while ago, but I have heard stories from other people that it's still happening, is that I took an accessible cab and it was later in the evening, and when, I can't remember where I stayed from, when I got home, I looked at the meter, asked the driver how much, and the driver was trying to tell me that he had the right to charge me a surcharge because of the time of night, and I told him that under no circumstances did he have the right to do that, and there is no way I was going to pay it, and I refused to pay it. He obviously didn't do anything about that because he knew he was in the wrong. But I don't like give in to stuff like that, but I know that there are a lot of people who do, and there are a lot of people who would have very easily just done what they were told, that don't sort of challenge things as easily. And that's really hard on people because taxi fare is expensive to start with. And when you've got drivers that want to get an extra few bucks out of you because they figure you've got a disability, so you should be a pushover, I think that's something that's really scary. And that goes beyond just trying to rip you off. It's taking advantage of somebody because they have a disability and you assume that they're gullible.
And Terry, I'm glad you to bring those things up. Those are all real important points, and I think that's just why I think this hotline and email thing we need to get to the community, so that, in particular, as Tom says, dealing with accessible vehicles, if in fact we have these complaints, we have the staff now to bring these drivers in. You have 1,200. You have 1,200 drivers, and you know, majority of them are very professional, and they try to do a really good job. We do get the odd one that we need to hold accountable, and that's what we have done in licensing, and we're doing a better job of it now.
Would there be any way that if you do like what Tom was suggesting, and you get a hotline for accessible cabs, and you're looking after complaints dealing with accessible cabs, would there be any way that maybe the transportation subcommittee would be able to get a report every so often as to like just how many rides are going out, how many complaints you're getting, all that, just like we get that with ATS, and be nice just to sort of be able to look at the numbers every now and then, just see how things are going.
And you're right, Terry. I think that's what I'm hoping to get from the brokers with their computer system, to be able to track the accessible vehicles, the rides, the denials, all that information. But in particular, we can include the complaints that we're looking at and investigating. Just in my department alone, last year we investigated 4,500 different complaints that we had to do. Our officers went out and did 4,500 different investigations. So it's a small group, but we're very, very busy, and so you know, we try to do the best we can with the resources we have.
Oh, another experience. My wife was doing a rehab at the General. She was sitting outside waiting for Red Cross to take her home, and cabs would be pulling up, mostly accessible cabs. Well, no, they weren't accessible, but they say there's a charge to put your walker in the trunk. Well, my wife, she can't keep quiet, so she says, no, there isn't. she just told the driver off. She says, no such charge. Yeah. And this was a senior too that they were doing it to. So.
No, those are all things that we need to correct.
There's a lot of that going on probably at the hospitals, right?
Yeah, and we need to correct and make sure that they're providing good quality service and not taking advantage of people. So. And this is why we have the system we have. That's why we license, and it is a right to be licensed, and we can take that right away if, in fact, they don't want to provide good quality service.
A while back, we heard that they were going to try to increase the number of accessible taxis by every time one had to be renewed. That was the criteria that they would put on it. Is that still current? Or are you guys still thinking about that?
So if in fact a license comes up, then that was one of the policies we looked at, if we would not reissue it unless it was an accessible taxi. We have not had any new licenses, and everyone that currently owns the license has retained the license. And so we haven't seen that transition. Even when someone owns a license and they have passed away, they turn it over to a family member. You know,
So they're not regularly renewed?
They're renewed every year, but
Yeah, the renewed, are you just, I think the question was,
Or maybe
is
was
the
it?
question that when someone wants to sell a plate, is that what you're, because they renew every year, so
Right.
all 447 have to renew
Or if
every
they
year.
have to get a new cab.
Yeah, I think that's what it was, Bob. That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
when the
whenever
cab
they
had,
needed
the
a new
vehicle had to be
vehicle.
changed
Yes, that they should then be sort of
to
accessible.
accessible.
yeah, I mean, that would be something that have to be investigated, because a lot of them buy vehicles that are older, and they only use them for 2 or 3 years, and for us to force them, it would have to be a council decision to force every new vehicle to be accessible. You're putting a significant impact on the industry, because they'll complain that they can't afford the $40,000 to transfer the vehicle into an accessible vehicle.
Do you have any idea at what rate they renew the vehicles? Like how many a year would be renewed? Roughly?
We got probably
They're
about,
good for 6 years, right? So,
I think we probably have around 30 or 40 being renewed this year. Like what happens is the bylaw allows them to operate for so many years, and then if it's past that vehicle year, they have to buy another one. But they don't buy brand new vehicles. They buy 3 or 4 year old vehicles, and then just transfer the equipment over into it. So.
Wouldn't it be great that if the city could give some kind of incentive, like a couple of $1,000s for 1 year, to sort of make this move faster? Just a thought.
I mean, certainly those are some of the areas that would be worthwhile looking at. I mean, I think you're right. If there was an incentive for them to outfit a vehicle, at a lesser cost, then I think they could see the demand. Or if in fact there became a market out there for more demand, they'll say, well, if I can capture this market if I have one of these vehicles. So there's lots of things to consider. I'm hoping at least we can take the small steps that we haven't taken, 16, and then move forward with another 6 per year for the next 3 years until the bylaw is done. It's at least a step in the right direction. Then you're looking at just shy of 10% of the fleet that is accessible.
Could I encourage you to look at 10 or 12 a year? Truly,
Sure.
it's a problem. I mean, we need to go to doctor's appointments, go shopping, we need to go and have recreational things, come to meetings, go to conferences.
Appreciate it.
It's worse than darts,
Yeah.
and I see that shedding a tear. Any other questions, Teresa?
Just to follow up on what you're
And then
saying is
Patty.
that, yeah, it is worse than darts. And when you have a disability, you use a mobility device, you're visually impaired, and you need to get somewhere, just knowing that you have no reliable way. Darts is not reliable. Now, taxis aren't reliable. If you can't take an HSR bus, you really don't have anywhere of getting where you need to go, knowing that you have a reliable way of getting there and knowing when you're going to get there. So if you're doing anything, if it's business, if it's recreation, whatever, you try to make plans to go to a movie even or something, you have no way of getting where you need to go, being able to ensure that you will get the ride that you need and being able to get there on time. And that's just really not fair, it's not equality. It's not equality for people with disabilities to have unreliable transportation.
my apologies, I have to.
Thanks.
Patty?
Just a comment, the wheelchair accessible taxis, they're still licensed to operate 24/7, right?
Yes.
Well, maybe the taxi companies should be reminded of that, because it is a big problem that they're refusing rides.
Can I answer that, Patty? When I asked the brokers about that, they said, well, they don't own cabs, it's up to the driver.
Yeah, the brokers actually only dispatch the vehicles. It's the people that own the plate are the ones that can operate it. They can operate it 1 day a week if they want, or they can operate it, 7 days a week if they had other drivers. So they are kind of independent contractors that kind of do what they want. They get licensed by the city, but they run it according to how they want.
Isn't that a loophole that should be looked into though?
By the city, yeah.
But, I mean, the city doesn't run the taxis, we only license them. So it's not like we're in the business of running the taxis. We only give them permission to run.
I understand that, but it's the city that started this initiative to make accessible taxis available to the citizens of Hamilton.
And I think it's an important initiative that we need to continue on.
Isn't that what you can put a condition on the license that says it needs to be on the road at some amount of hours?
It would be similar to someone opening up a restaurant and getting their license, and you tell them that they need to be open 7 days a week, and they say, well, no, I don't want to be. I only want to be open 4 days a week. They still, it's their ability, because if in fact you wanted them to work more of a system, then they would have to become the leaser of the plate, and they would have to hire employees, because obviously a driver couldn't drive more than 40 hours a week. So that becomes a different model. But there are things that we can do to improve the service, and I think the fact is competition is one of the best ways to get people motivated. And there's a niche market for accessible vehicles, and I think as more people use them, the people say there's a demand for them, and so that's. I think the solution is moving towards offering more vehicles out there.
Just one question. I'm not sure if I understand what an MB1 is.
That's a vehicle that was designed already accessible by a Canadian group who took it to be manufactured in the US. And DARTS now has 6 of them, I believe, but it's the city that owns them, and they're allowing Ron to run it with Yellow Cab, just like they do like the DARTS ambulatory system with vehicles like the vans. No, he doesn't. I think the city owns it. Does anybody know for sure?
I don't know very much about darts at all, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the city is purchasing them, and that's how it's being run. Regardless, it's a, yeah, these people are trying to sell it on not just as a taxi, but as a private vehicle. So,
One question, customer service part of training for taxi drivers, who does that?
It's the Taxi Academy. It's a group that has credentials to actually instruct, and they do it on behalf of the city. So we direct them. They report through to us, but they're an independent company, and we tell them what are the criteria, what we should be looking at, collectively in partnership with the brokers, and that's why we say customer service should be the focus of the next several years.
Can you tell them that, just because we have a disability, you don't have to talk to the person next to them to ask them the questions that you're supposed to ask the person that's getting in the cab?
Yeah.
Because they do kind of ignore us.
Good. It's a good point, and I'll mention to the Taxi Academy.
okay, so committee, are we wanting to invite a presentation or discussion at the transportation committee level?
Well, what people are not here that might have words to say, but would you be available to come to the transportation?
Myself or someone will be available whenever it is, if need be.
Yeah?
Yep.
That would be, maybe the end of this month, it's the 4th
Tuesday.
Tuesday of the month,
At 4 o'clock?
26th, yeah, 4 o'clock.
Nancy, can you make sure I get notified? That'd be great.
Okay,
Thank you.
so thank you very much for being here.
And thank you.
We probably can help you quite a bit if you wish to use our advice or opinion or experiences, and we certainly hope that you succeed. There's a lot of people that need that service.
And I appreciate your feedback. I think it really helps me focus as I move forward to council with some of these recommendations, and I really appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. Motion to accept the presentation. Paula, seconded by Terry. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. All right, so according to the clock on the wall, it's like 7 minutes if I stretch it to 6. Is there any burning issue that we should take care of? Okay. So, would it be all right if I gave a report? Sorry, Mary, I didn't see your hand till now. I'll just finish talking and then you can tell me what you're gonna say. So prior to this meeting, a group of us met to talk about like our work plan and what we want to achieve and what we want to do in the future. Would you like me to give a little brief summary of what we talked about? Is anybody against that? Okay. So, Mary, what were you going to say?
You had asked if there was a burning issue we needed to discuss, and the next thing on the agenda was the annual report for
Yeah,
ACPD, and
I don't think we've got
We
enough
won't
time
have
to go
time.
through that.
We'll have to do it next time.
Yeah, so that'll be tabled. Did you want to say something?
Just 15 seconds or less. But I think, Mary, individually, if people had anything, any comments, or did we miss anything? Because all we're doing is capturing what you've done. So if you've got anything, if we've missed anything, just call or email and let me know, okay?
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Could we put it on the agenda again for next month?
Yes.
All right.
Just to warn you though, it may be finalized by then, but it doesn't mean your comments or any addition, it can't be taken into account. I'm just saying, the report, we have to cut it off at some point, but if you have anything else, we'll just add it on to, as we go forward, for future work. See what I'm saying?
Okay, so there's a deadline when you have to submit it?
Yeah, like we wanna cut that off.
Okay,
Or
can
just
it be
keep
cut
going.
off after the next ACPD meeting? Is that doable?
That's too much.
End of
Why?
month.
Because I have a date that it should be finished, which was already last month. So if it keeps going and going, but if I wait till then I have to wait another month to submit it. So it takes another month of time, that's why.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if we can.
Do it by email? We
Yeah,
can try.
or
But I
call
think,
me.
when was it distributed?
In December.
It was in December?
Yeah, that was the second one actually.
Nobody looked at it till
No.
now.
I know.
Because the holidays.
It was prior, yeah, that
Oh.
was the second one, but I'm just saying, still read it and then let me know if there's any questions or concerns or things you think I missed. You can still do that.
Okay. Is that okay by the committee?
Yep.
Comments?
The only problem with that, Asnaf, is we won't have approved it then.
Mm-mm.
Oh,
There isn't anything to approve because these are things you've done already.
right.
This is not an approval document, it captures what you've done, I wanted you to see that. The things that you have already.
How
It's its
about-
format that bothers me, Maxine, because it's very, very hard to read, and last year's was beautifully clear and concise.
Okay,
You
so
can-
here's my thought, sorry Maxine. What if we individually each send our comments to Maxine if we have any? And then when Maxine is ready to finish it, could you circulate it one more time?
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yep.
All right, we don't need a motion for that, do we?
My suggestion would be that we do have a motion reflecting that, because whatever is not dealt with at this meeting because of our time constraints, I need to bring forward to the next meeting. So if I don't have a motion, then by default I would be doing that, Madam Chair. And it also shows consensus that that's what was agreed on.
Okay. Can we have a motion?
Tom? I'll second.
What, okay, what is the motion? That we have an opportunity to input our information and then we see the final draft before it goes?
Yes.
Okay, so motion by Tom, seconded by Paula. All in favor? Anybody against it? Okay, carried. Thanks. And so some people that don't have emails, how will they receive
Oh, we'll
it?
just mail it to you,
Okay.
deliver it.
Okay. All right.
Yes. Or call, it doesn't have to be email, phone me.
So the presentation by, what's his name, Lee Durst? How'd you say it?
And Linder?
Leaders, was very timely because what we were talking about was having clusters of agencies tell us what issues there are in the community and like having a round table and seeing what the issues are and then taking it and discussing it among ourselves and seeing if we can recommend solutions to these things. So we were thinking transportation, mental health, vision, hearing, just different groupings, and maybe aim to do 4 this year, and then just look at, try to take a deep look at what their concerns might be. If the Office of Equity and Access could also share the complaints perhaps they've had pertaining to these, it would be beneficial. Does the committee think this is a good idea, good endeavor?
Sorry.
You said agencies?
Yep.
Agencies, service providers, maybe.
That serve people with disabilities or
Yeah.
any, oh, okay.
You know, and I don't think we would say no to individuals who maybe want to participate. What do you think?
No. Reason being, Maxine, is that, agencies and service providers out there probably have no idea who we are. And we have no idea what they do, and we have no idea what complaints their clients have about accessibility in the city, right?
Oh, I see. Okay.
So to try and get a picture of all that, to try and get all these groups together would, I think, would be a great idea to, so we could funnel it all together. I mean, there may be things out there we've never even thought of.
All right, so our next meeting for this working group will be prior to the February ACPD meeting. And I would encourage as many people as can to come to that so we can really sit down. Okay, so the question is, do you have to invite agencies or can we do that? Knowing that your schedule is really full and
Well, I think I should invite them, and if you give us a list, we'll just create like one standard invite letter that goes to them. And, but the thing is, you said 4 a year, so it's not a lot.
no, not a huge number. All right, so I'm not going to take any more questions or comments, I'm sorry. It's after 6, so I would encourage everyone that can to come to that meeting to help us work through this. And I need a motion to adjourn. Nobody wants to? Oh, Terry. Seconded by Bob. All in favor?
It's so hot in here.